All right, today we're going to be doing a video that I am super excited for because it's been quite a while since I've shared some favorite eyeshadow palettes that I've tried recently. We are going to be focusing on palettes that I have tried in 2026. I think there's maybe a couple of exceptions where the palette was released in 2025. I think the last time that I filmed a video like this was for 2025, where I talked about some of my favorite palettes that I tried in the year. And this is going to be a more concise video. I'm really going to try to focus on 15 palettes. I'm going to show you some detailed swatches and eye swatches or a look depending on what I focused on for that palette. Let's go ahead and get into it. I will either link products or share the code that I have with each brand, and that'll be down in the description. All right, starting off with a palette from r.e.m Beauty, and this particular footage was when I first opened the palette. They gave us eyeshadow quads, and I know I've talked about these quads quite a few times before because I really do enjoy them, especially the Fembot Fatale palette, which is this one. I think the formula on these are so nice. I love that you get two duochromes and a super sparkly silver shimmer in here. I really love to travel with these because the packaging is sturdy, it's small, and I feel like these are just generally speaking a real win for the brand, so I'm excited to see them continue to add some palettes to this range. I know they not too long ago came out with their Dangerous Woman palette. Let's talk about the formula of these. The shimmers are a little bit on the drier side, but they're quite soft, so you get quite a lot of impact from them. They're not creasy, they last well, and the shimmers, as you can see, are incredibly sparkly. I know this palette only has one matte. The others do have more than one matte, and they're actually very easy to work with. They have a thinner formula, very soft, very easy to blend. I really do hope to see that they decide to add some more colorful mattes in the range because it's quite a nice formula. If you're in the US, you can get these at Sephora and Ulta. And I do have a dedicated video on these if you're curious to see more about them. I will link that video in the cards. All right, the next palette we have is from Cosmetica, and this came out toward the beginning part of the year. This is one of their classic 9-pan palettes, which is their most common format. Typically with these palettes, you have a pretty even split of mattes and shimmers. You either have 4 mattes, 5 shimmers, or 5 mattes, 4 shimmers. I have really come to enjoy these palettes, and this color story in particular really spoke to me. Of course, I like that you have some blue in here, and then I do like some of the more muted tones, the olive. And I know I've mentioned this before, but I just feel like the shimmers have really stepped up over the years when it comes to oomph. They've got some iridescence in here. I love the blue-brown duochrome. That's the one I have on my pinky right now. It's definitely a palette that I feel like I haven't heard a ton of people talk about since it came out, but it continues to be one that I think about and would definitely be in the top, I would say, 3 to 5 palettes from the brand. Which is saying a lot because they have been around for, I want to say, 4.5 years at this point. The mattes I find to be on the more buildable side, which is honestly my preference, especially when you have some more kind of colorful shades. Just makes them more approachable to me. And another thing I want to mention is that these pans are magnetic, so if you enjoy taking the pans out and rearranging them and making your own color story, you can do that, which is a real plus because the components that these come in are very nice. Here's what the whole palette looks like swatched in the back of my hand. All right, and while we are talking about Cosmetica, I also want to mention Cosmic Cove, which is done in collaboration with Miles Multichromatica. I truly think this palette is so well done, and I'll tell you why. I just think that it's very hard to do a very, very colorful palette that includes both mattes and shimmers and have it be so concise and cohesive. I think it is just so well done, and you have, I want to say, like only 4 shimmers in here, but they are all like high impact. They're multi-use. You have a couple that are like on the more semi-sheer side, one iridescent. That yellow shimmer has a gorgeous green shift, and I always love having a kind of blue iridescent that I can use on the inner corner or as a highlighter, which is what I did in this little clip that I'm sharing. And this palette, I have seen so many gorgeous looks come out of it. So major props to Miles. I do consider him to be a friend, so I do have that bias, but those are the reasons why I think this palette is so well done. I wish it was able to be permanent in their lineup, but it's hard to do that with collab palettes. But I do believe it's currently still available, so if you did have your eye on it and hadn't gotten a chance to pick it up, it is still around at this point. And here is what the whole palette looks like swatched to my arm. Okay, this next palette I'm going to talk about, I'm not sure is still available, but I do want to talk about it because this brand makes incredible eyeshadow in general, and that is Dramo. Dramo is a Chinese beauty brand. You can get them at Look Healthy Store, C Beauty Mall. You can also find them at Yes Style, and this palette was done in collaboration with a creator who does some gorgeous editorial looks. Her name is Lau. And in the look that I'm sharing here, I actually recreated or tried to recreate a look that she did that just stopped me in my tracks. But let me tell you what I enjoy about the Drama palettes. I mean, the shimmers definitely speak for themselves. They are so special, but the mattes are also incredible. They are so easy to work with, and they really do ground the palettes. They actually have some palettes that are all matte. I have a few that I'm actually interested in, but I haven't picked up. But that is saying a lot because, you know, the shimmers are usually what make palettes stand out to me. But in this case, I think that both really hold their own. I also just find the color stories to be incredibly unique. Like, I wouldn't have thought of pairing these really muted tones with those super bright pops of neon. Just a really inspiring color story palette and brand in general. Okay, and while we're talking about Dramo, I do want to mention this all shimmer palette as well. I don't think that it is currently available. I do see that it may be on AliExpress, but I don't have any experience with ordering from there, and I've heard some mixed things, so I do want to throw that out there. The reason why I wanted to mention this palette is because Dramo has done all shimmer palettes before, and I didn't try the first one. This is the first all shimmer palette that I tried from them, and I think this is a gorgeous palette. You know, the gradient shimmers have sort of been trending. I think that the quality of these ones is so nice. You get a beautiful chrome shift with all 4 shades. Sparkly, a little bit drier texture, so I do think that they'll work for a variety of skin types. And it does seem like the pan sizes for the different Dramo palettes is uniform, so you can like take out this pan and put it into one of the other palettes if you want to. So if you did have your eye on these palettes or didn't know about them, I do think that the quality is really there and it's worthwhile to check them out. All right, and the next palette we have is from Cosmic Beauty, and this is the Sun. This is a newer palette, but for sure does land in one of my top palettes of the year. I have so been waiting for a palette like this from the brand. It's been a minute since we got something that was bright and colorful, and a minute since we had something that was in their typical 20 pan format. Their last palette that they had, I believe, was 12 pans, and that came out around Valentine's Day. Cosmic Beauty is a UK-based indie brand. I have used their palettes for, I want to say, probably 4 years at this point. They do, in general, I would say, a great job at really keeping their prices down. And now they actually have a US warehouse as well, which is pretty cool. In terms of the formulas, I find the mattes to be incredibly buildable, so really hard to go overboard with the pigmentation, which I like. The shimmers have continued to evolve over time. I think in general, I would say they have tended to become sparklier, have a higher impact. Now the shimmers in this palette, I would say, were definitely on the more textured side compared to some of their other palettes. But in my opinion, that also meant that they had a higher payoff when it came to sparkle. But it is something I want to mention just in case. And unfortunately, there's actually been another brand that's been ripping off some of their palette designs, which I absolutely hate to see. I know they really work tirelessly on their color stories, and the releases in general are fairly spread apart. This palette is tarot inspired, and it really has some beautiful tones for summer going into fall. Of course, if you're not into warmer tones, you're probably not going to be gravitating toward this palette. My favorite shimmer is that pink that has an ultraviolet shift, and my favorite matte is that really bright orange matte. Alright, the next palette I have is from Clionadh, and it's actually been a minute since they had a palette release. I want to say maybe last year. They did have a little glow quad, which is very nice. This is their Galapagos palette that just came out within the past couple of months. I do feel like this one isn't going to be for everyone. I consider this one to be mostly what I would call a neutrals with a twist. You don't get the most colorful shades in here, but you definitely get some beautiful chrome shifts, shades that make for being special while still kind of day-to-day friendly. I do like that they're the same size pans as their typical stained glass shadows, and that you get some shades that are a little bit more opaque while others that are a little bit more sheer, and the iridescent in here is on the smoother side. I would say this is typical to their Series 3. Those happen to be their newest iridescent line and my own personal favorite. Now, I have a whole video dedicated to this palette if you want to see more details. They also have the On Top of the World palette that came out last year. I didn't include that one here because in general I'm trying to focus on 2026 palettes. But if I were to venture a guess, I would say probably their On Top of the World palette is their best-selling palette. And their Light Scatters palette, which came out a few years ago and is fantastic. That was done in collaboration with Bad to the Brow. Alright, and the next palette we have is Stargazing. This was done in collaboration with Ellie Star and Tara Moons. They actually had a few palettes as a part of their collaboration, and this is the second of the two. I absolutely love this color story, which is probably completely unsurprising because you have some really pretty blues in here. You have a blue-purple iridescent. You've got a pop of lime, and everything performed well. Now, I have tried their palettes before, which are made in the lab, and I have really been a fan of that formula. So I'm not surprised by the high quality of this formula as well. As I mentioned, there were two palettes that Ellie came out with. They're both really pretty, but this is definitely the color story of the two that speaks to me the most. And in case you are looking for inspo, Ellie has shared quite a few looks using this palette, so definitely recommend checking them out, especially on Instagram where she shares a lot of tutorials. Alright, and the next palette I have is from Arttitude Cosmetics, and this again is footage that I took right when I got the palette. This is called Moonlight Muse. Artitude is quite a small UK-based indie brand, and at any given time they typically have like a few palettes in stock. I don't think that this one is currently available, though I do really hope they restock it. When I first got it, I wasn't sure if this one was one of my favorite color stories. I have to say it's really grown on me, especially because it is so unique. I don't think I've seen a color story quite like it before. Something that Artitude does really, really well is giving a ton of very special shimmers in every palette. You can always depend on that, and even though not all of the shimmers in this palette are chromes, all of them are super sparkly. You have some duochromes. I think you have a couple shades that are holographic and some very sparkly metallics. This palette is definitely for the person that loves cool toned color stories. I could see this one as being polarizing and definitely not for everyone, but I've come back to thinking about this palette quite a bit. And they also have a selection of mattes that I think is unique as well. I really like that kind of purpley gray. And I really like that maroon as well. Two very useful deepening up shades. Just like usual, this is their typical 16 pan color story. And this came out during winter, which I think is a perfect time for this type of color story. Here's what the whole palette looks like swatched to my arm. Again, I think this is definitely one for the person that likes cool tone color stories. Here are the 2 different looks that I created on camera with the palette. I was inspired to pull up my own gemstones because they incorporated a lot of gemstones in the promo looks that they created. Okay, and the next palette I have is from Cherup, and Cherup, if you aren't familiar, is a Sea Beauty brand. Sea Beauty stands for Chinese beauty, and I have really gone down the Sea Beauty rabbit hole over the past several years. Some of the places you can find Cherup are Look Healthy Store, Sea Beauty Mall, and Yes Style. I would say that all 3 sites are great. They have their pros and cons. It just depends on what works best for you. But this is the palette Ember, and I included it because I think that it is such a beautiful neutrals with a twist palette. I know it's not their most colorful color story, but I really enjoy the assortment of shimmers that you have in here, as well as the variety of textures. Especially when I wear neutral eyeshadow, I prefer my neutrals, generally speaking, to be a little bit cooler. Although that's hard to say generalizing because I have a few warmer toned neutral palettes that I have really enjoyed this year. In my opinion, the Cherup palettes are very reasonably priced and you get a great quality, so the value is really there. Here is what the Ember palette looks like swatched to my arm. Love that you have some super sparkly toppers that are kind of semi-sheer, and I really love that charcoal shimmer. And here's the look I created on camera utilizing the palette. I absolutely love a good smoky eye, and this palette is perfect for a sparkly glam smoky eye. Okay, and since we're already talking about Chinese beauty, I am going to share palettes from a couple other brands as well. This is Dusk Sands, and it's by a brand called Cosmetic. I'm actually brand new to it, but you can find them at Look Healthy Store and Sea Beauty Mall. This is a palette that really caught my eye from the packaging standpoint and even from the color story standpoint. And I had a feeling before I got this palette that the shimmers in here were going to be special. And they truly are. And I actually shared swatches of this palette on Instagram, and I had many other people tell me as well that they have really been enjoying this one. My favorite shimmer is, of course, that green brown duochrome. It is so eye-catching, but I also love the oranges. I don't know what it is about oranges recently, but I have really been feeling them in palettes and color stories. All of the shimmers in here were, as I expected, very standout, and they performed beautifully on the lids. A couple of them were a little bit more on the textured side, but I didn't mind that. I use a tacky primer. Here's what all 4 shimmers look like swatched in the back of my hand, and here's what the whole palette looks like swatched to my arm. The mattes were thinner and were definitely very buildable, but as I've mentioned before, I actually do prefer that kind of matte, because generally that means they're going to be more beginner friendly. I hope this brand makes more palettes because I was super impressed. For this palette, I actually didn't record eye swatches or a look, but I have used it, and of course I had to incorporate the green brown duochrome every time I used it. Okay, the next palette we have is also from a Sea Beauty brand. This is Cryptine Cosmetics. This palette is called Tropical Mirage, and in the past, I have said that Cryptine Cosmetics is my favorite brand when it comes to Sea Beauty eyeshadow palettes, and that is still very much true. And what I love about Cryptine palettes is, first of all, the shimmers. You could get these palettes for the shimmers alone, and it would be completely worth it. To me, of course, but really, the shimmers in here are so incredibly high impact. They're very shifty. They sparkle like crazy. They are a little bit softer, so you really pick them up when you touch with your fingertips. Applying shimmers with my finger is in general my preferred application. The mattes in these palettes are really good too. And the reason I included this palette in particular is because it's so bright and fun, and it complements the Sunset Symphony palette that came out around this time last year so incredibly well. So this is probably hands down my favorite palette that they've done since the Sunset Symphony palette last year. Cryptine Cosmetics has their own website, but you can also find them at CBD Mall and Look Healthy store. All right, and the next palette we have is from Singe Beauty, and this is called Succulent Dew. And I was actually new to trying Singe Beauty this year. I have received their latest palettes in PR, and something that I want to mention about the formula of the shimmers is that they are really formulated with people that have kind of like hooded lids in mind. The shimmers that you get are very sparkly. They may not all be chromes, but the texture is such that I think a lot of people will get on with them. I know it's also been a goal of the owner, Angeshka, that the price point be kept kind of around that kind of $50 price point, which, don't get me wrong, is pricey, but when you add chromes, like a bunch of chromes into the mix, then that is definitely a factor that really causes the price point of the palette to go up. And Succulent Dew, I think, is my favorite palette from the brand. I love the jewel tones you get in here, but also the lighter pastel tones and how they contrast with those richer tones. All right, next palette we have is Dark Dreamscape, and this is one of those palettes that doesn't technically fall under the 2026 category. It did come out toward the latter part of last year. Dark Dreamscape is from Bella Beauté Bar, and since it came out, it is definitely in one of my top palettes from the brand. Usually I actually prefer color stories that are a little bit smaller, but I really like the 20 pen palettes from Bella Beauté Bar. Maybe not all of them are my jam color story wise, but they've got several that have ended up in my favorites that are 20 pans. Of course, one of the cons about that is that they are a little bit on the pricier side because they have chromes and they have 20 pans, but I've noticed that a lot of their palettes do restock when they get sold out. So they do manage to avoid a lot of the issues with FOMO that can happen, especially when there is concern that something is going to sell out. One of my favorite things to do is revisit palettes, and I love hearing when people tell me that they pick something up like a year after it's released and they're glad they waited and that it truly was worth the wait. So why Dark Dreamscape for me? I really like the blues, the purples, that pop of orange. I think it's a very fun color story, and the shimmers in here are very special. It was honestly hard for me to pick between this one and Crystallize. They both have a ton of very special shimmers included in them. You have to let me know in the comments if you've tried any of their 20 pen palettes and if you agree that they are some of the best that they make. Here's what the whole palette looks like swatched on my arm, and I do believe this palette came out around Halloween last year, which felt like a perfect time of year for purple and orange combinations. Okay, and the last palette I want to talk about is Boo Drops from Diveron, and this is probably no surprise because I've talked about their previous palettes, Dew Drops 1 and Dew Drops 2, several times. I adore these palettes and I've had so many people tell me that they love them too. It's for good reason. These are so fun to just incorporate into your looks, to travel with, to use all over the lid, as inner corner highlights, even as a face highlight if you like a bold, blinding face highlight. And I love that all three of the palettes are actually so different. The vibes of them are so different. You can't go wrong with any of them, but you won't get overlap if you already have one of them. So what are the vibes? I would say the vibes of Boo Drops are a little bit more on the pastel side. The tones you have in here are, in general, a little bit lighter than Dew Drops 2. Dew Drops 1 has the iconic shade called Drop, which they've since made into a highlighter, which I think was such a smart move. As you can see, these are sparkly toppers, iridescence. Some of the texture of the shimmers feel a little bit soft to the touch, but I have not experienced creasing with any of the shades from the Dew Drops palettes. And here's what the whole palette looks like swatched on my arm. All right, now that we've had a chance to talk about a bunch of palettes I have truly enjoyed in 2026, I'd really love to hear what you think about my picks. As I mentioned before, I don't consider this video to be completely comprehensive, but I wanted to hand select palettes that really stood out to me this year and just nerd out over them as we enjoy doing. Let me know what your favorite was in the comments, and if you have any other palettes that you've truly been enjoying this year. If you made it to the end of my video, I would love it if you would leave me a palette emoji. As always, I hope you found my video helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.